How you doing, YouTube? Matt Massive Beer Reviews. Back with a little bit of side-by-side action. Hold on to your, what do you want to hold on to here? Knickers? Let's hold on to our knickers. And, yeah, do a little bit of side-by-side bourbon barrel-aged coffee stouts. A little bit of other half up in this piece in the form of their double sunset. Now, these are two different beers, or pretty much the same beers, but with a little bit of coffee variance. So, it deserves a side-by-side, and that side-by-side is brought to you by my boy Kyle from Brooklyn. He sent off a bottle mail of crazy proportions. There was 2 of these non-barrel aged. There was 2 of these barrel aged. There was 2 of other half in Wakefield stuff. There was 3 Grims in there. It's getting crazy all over the place. We're going to do these first. What do we have over here? On this side, we're going to be doing other half. It's a bourbon barrel aged Imperial Stout with Coava Coffee Roasters. So that's the name of the coffee roasters. It's their Guatemalan Nayo Ovella coffee, vanilla, and milk sugar. So 13% over here. And over here, we have a bourbon barrel aged Imperial Stout with Mighty Oak Coffee Roasters. And it is their Ethiopian Sasaba coffee, vanilla, and milk sugar at 13%. So really, it is the only difference on these two beers is the coffee. So it should be, hopefully, should be a fun side-by-side. We have a bottle opener somewhere around here. That would be nice. I have one somewhere. Oh, there should be. There's my battle axe. So, yeah. We should see how these suckers roll. Do the two-way pour for you all that I tend to spill a lot, but sometimes I nail it, so we'll see how the sucker goes. So, okay. Oh, sometimes I do this and I do this well. Now these don't have big heads on them, so you're not going to get a ton of flowiness off of it. Throw that sucker there. Move this sucker. Put it over there. There you go. I mean, the heads are pretty much the same. I kind of had to catch up on this side over here with the pour, so there's a little bit of extra head on it, but there's not much of a head. These are motor oil. Straight up motor oil from a distance. The head is what I like my coffee to look like color. So we're off to a good start there. But as far as those beers go, I mean, you could lubricate engines. Yeah. So this is the Coava Coffee Roasters over here in the Guatemalan blend. So we'll see how this sucker gets on with the nose. It smells nice. As I get beer all over my nose. I mean, the coffee portion of the show is epically present. I don't think you'd ever confuse us with just being a big roasty beer with coffee vibes from the roast, from the roasted malt itself. There's definitely a coffee component to it, but it's close enough to where you could be like, this is coffee in this, but it's not gigantic. But you're also talking about a 13% beer, milk, sugar, vanilla, bourbon barrel. But the coffee is still leading the way here. So it's definitely number one on the call sheet. And it smells more like, almost like coffee, like a mocha coffee, or even like coffee ice cream to a certain extent. In the way the coffee's kind of coming off. Because it's roasty, but there's this kind of sweet vanilla kind of confectionariness to it that just ends up being a little bit more kind of desserty coffee-wise. When I think of coffee, I think of the way I drink coffee. I think that's how everybody thinks when it comes to coffee. And my coffee is 16 ounces, 2 to 3 Splendid, depending on where I'm getting it from, dark roast, and just a little bit of half and half. I know, God forbid, you're throwing milk in a goddamn coffee, but that's how I drink it. And it's coming off kind of like that, but a little bit more of that confectionery vanilla going on. So you're getting into that kind of Dunkin' Donuts pseudo milkshakey kind of coffee thing, but it's still a beer. You know, you're not going to confuse this with one of those fancy milkshakes masquerading as a coffee that a lot of people get from Starbucks and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it smells nice. It smells big, it smells bold, not overly hot. You get a little bit of subtle bourbon in there, not much as far as barrel character, vanilla, and the lactose kind of come off, but meld well with the coffee and come off as a kind of, you know, milk and 2 sugars kind of coffee. This would be the Ethiopian blend from Mighty oak coffee roaster. So let's see how this sucker kind of comes off. Really similar. I mean, probably a little bit more roasty, a little bit more dark roasty over here, but very similar as far as the noses go. Getting that lactose, getting that milk sugar, and you're getting that coffee over here. There's just a little subtle roast characteristic bump over here, but very, very similar. I mean, when you have this many moving components, big beer, barreled beer, lactose, milk sugar, you're talking about all those components are almost exactly the same. And the only variant you're talking about here is coffee. You're probably not expecting a huge gap unless the coffee is some weird, bizarre version of a coffee, but there is a subtle difference to it. They both smell pretty nice. I would just, in the grand scheme of things, if I was going to kind of knee-jerk react to the beers from a distance, I like the coffee to be bumped up slightly on both ends, and I'd like there to be a little more barrel characteristic as opposed to just kind of like a soft bourbon character. But the vanilla's not overly heavy-handed, at least in the nose. Let's dive in. Cheers. Okay, sweet. No shit, Sherlock. 13% bourbon barrel aged. Lactose, vanilla. And while it is sweet, it's not like over the top like lactose sweet. It's not over the top vanilla sweet. You get the vanilla, that leads the way. I think the lactose kind of props that up a little bit. But it's more, I think, a bourbon and a big, heavy, hefty beer sweetness more than anything else. So you're expecting a big beer here. You're expecting a sweet beer here, and you definitely get that here. The coffee's left me wanting, though. Really not getting a ton of coffee off of this. And this is the one that had a little bit more oomph to it as far as the coffee goes. Sure. You're definitely getting coffee vibes off of the beer. But it's definitely down the rung. You know, it's probably the fourth player here. You know, it's coming in. Number one is, I guess I would say the beer. No, it's going to be the lactose and vanilla. It's not that big. But it has to be number one. With the way the sweetness comes off and it makes you lean in that direction. On this side of things, it comes off number one. Close behind is the actual beer itself. The bourbon comes in probably third. It's probably a little bit more towards the top as far as sweetness, but not as bourbon characteristic. I'd be really curious to see how long this spent in any kind of bourbon barrel. To me, it's gotta be sub 6 months, maybe 3 months or less, because it's more wet barrel or wet spirit to me than actual barrel, because I'm not getting much, if any, barrel char whatsoever. I'm getting vanilla, I'm getting lactose, but I couldn't tell you that's coming from the barrel. So it's kind of one of those things where if you told me this, I'm not saying they did this, but you're saying they just kind of poured a little bourbon in those barrels, you know, So that's how this side kind of comes off. Just want the coffee to be more. It's coffee oriented. You know, that's why this beer exists, for these variants of coffee, and that is not the calling card of the beer, at least on this side of things. Let's go over here, and this one came off a little bit less as far as coffee vibes go. Let's see how the taste goes, though. Cheers. Very similar. The only difference is the bourbon's a little bit more aggressive on this side, which is interesting. The vanilla, actually, everything's probably dialed up just a notch, along with the coffee, but then the coffee stays at the level it's at. So it's a notch up, but everything else is a notch up, so it doesn't really gain much of anything. So it's a little bit more vibrant. The vanilla is a little bit more vanilla, and I actually dig the vanilla level on this. It's aggressive, but not overly aggressive. That bourbon has a little bit of heat to it, a little bit of sting to it. Very minimal, but enough to let you know you're drinking a bourbon barrel-aged beer. Man, the coffee is just really kind of not there for either of these beers. I mean, I've had coffee beers that have shown similar to these. But they weren't like, how do I put this? They weren't the stars of the show, you know? They weren't the stars of the show. They just happened to be, you know, a barrel-aged beer with this, that, and the other thing, and there's coffee in it too. Or it's a coffee beer and it's low ABV, so they just put a little bit of coffee in it, that kind of thing. When you sit there, and I don't know anything about these beers as far as other half goes. I don't know how they promoted them. I don't know if they promoted them as some kind of crazy coffee beers, but just from a distance, or should I say from closeness, you know, you're looking at two beers that are essentially exactly the same beers. The only variance is not just coffee, and not just specific coffees, but specific coffees from specific roasters. So just, you know, through deduction, I'm assuming that that was the big selling point on these beers. That we're going to make a big bourbon barrel aged stout. We're going to add a little lactose and vanilla in it to give you that little bit of milk, that little bit of sugar that you typically, most people drink in their coffees. And then we're going to bring these kind of boutique-y, artisanal coffee houses and let them just kind of go buck wild with their favorite variants, or maybe other half's favorite variants from this coffee company, and really showcase them in a bourbon barrel aged stout. And I'm just not getting it on either end of the spectrum. Not bad beers by any stretch. You know, I mean, they're tasty, fun bourbon barrel aged stouts that have coffee vibes to them, and I'm not going to sit here and say they suck. That is not the case. But as far as a vessel, as a showcase for specific coffee variants, they're just so subtle, you know? They're so subtle. It's like, you know, I don't know what analogy you want me to use. It's like me being like, I'm going to cook a dinner that is all about a variant of some kind of form. Meat. Let's just go meat. You know, I'm going to butcher. I just had a bunch of cows butchered. So I have a ton of meat in my freezer. So I have, you know, I have everything from tongue to, sorry, vegans. I have tongue to different cuts, from prime rib to to T-bone steaks, to ribeyes, to New York strips, to, everything. You skirt steaks, everything you possibly imagine. So if it was like, I'm going to do a Meatapalooza, which sounds like it's made up, but it totally isn't made up, because me and my friends would do, oh, I shouldn't say me and my friends, my buddy Goach and my buddy Brad would hold Meatapalooza every year. And I partook in a couple of years of that, to where we all just brought meat and went crazy. Anyway, but I was doing Meatapalooza, and I brought all these cuts of beef, and I just hid them behind garlic and salt and pepper and all those things you should probably use on a cut of beef. You want a cut of beef, you want to elevate it. You want to take it and you want to make it better, but you still want the main component to kind of shine through. And that's the take I'm kind of getting on these beers, but I'm just not getting it because everything else is ahead. The beer, which I always want to be a leader in the clubhouse, because you don't want the beer just to be coffee with beer vibes. You want it to be a beer, but even with the lactose, the vanilla, and that spirit just kind of trumps all the coffeeness going on. So now that I've talked for a bit, I've stepped away. Let's go from left to right real quick. Well, your right to my left. See if there's any change. Yeah, exactly the same reaction-wise. This beer over here, the one over here, a little amplified, a little bit sweeter, a little bit more vanilla, a little bit more of everything, but everything is equally raised. So it's a little bit more vibrant of a beer across the board. Over here, very similar, a little bit more muted. It's not a muted beer, but compared to this one, a little bit more muted. And again, beer, or lactose vanilla, beer shortly behind, bourbon characteristic, bourbon spirit, not barrel, shortly behind, then that coffee a distant fourth. Done and done on both ends of the spectrum. Not bad beers, but 'tis what it is. So the cuvee, as my boy Joe from the Beer Patrol would dive in and say. So cheers. See, I don't know if it's just placebo effect, but the cuvee typically is a favorite. And this one is not. I like it. I feel like the coffee's still not huge, but there's something about it that is just a little bit better than both. There you go. That's all I got. I don't know what else you guys want me to say. It's these are pretty unaspiring coffee beers. If you were to strip that coffee focus from it, you'd be like, oh, these are really well done Imperial Stouts with bourbon in them. I mean, they're not going to be the best ones I've ever had in my life, but I think they're fun and tasty. Once you break it down to them being the boutique-y artisanal coffee beers, they kind of just lose me. And that'd be a bummer. But I am really appreciative to actually got to taste them. So thank you very much, Kyle. Let's talk about it. Are these some of the better bourbon barrel-aged beers that I've had as of late? No. Well, I should say they're worthy of being in a conversation. Just, they're done really well. Other half knows what they're doing when it comes to beer in general. So they're not negative beers. They're not off beers. I'll say this, though. They taste like quick beers. And by quick beers, what I mean is they taste like a big Imperial Stout that was in a barrel for a very short period of time and rested on coffee for a very short period of time. Got dosed with lactose, got dosed with vanilla in a bottle. That's what these taste like. And that's probably the most damning critique I can give to these, is that these taste like money manufacturing beers. I'm making a big boutique bourbon barrel aged beers. I'm going to do it with all these kind of crazy artisanal coffees, and it's going to be great. But you just tried too hard to do it too fast. Coffee, vanilla, bourbon, barrel. To get the best out of those, you need time. And I feel like this kind of was like, okay, let's go, move it on. That's the kind of vibe I get off of these beers. Not necessarily it has anything to do with the ingredients. I'm sure the coffee roasters here were fantastic. I know the brewers are fantastic. I know pretty much all the ingredients are fantastic. But, if I have a fantastic chef and I say, make me a fantastic meal, probably going to make me a fantastic meal. If I say, make me a fantastic meal in 3 minutes, he could probably still whip up something pretty nice. Just might not be what he can whip up in a couple hours. So yeah. What else? Value and availability. I think these were like $21 a piece. Kyle, let me know what's what. Brewery only. Kinda. It's COVID time, so that's not the case pretty much anywhere. And leave you with, if you like what we like these. If you like big, huge bourbon barrel aged beers that are sweet and have coffee vibes and that are easy to kind of fall in love with if you're